Is MotoGP really more interesting if the riders hate each other? Maybe. Welcome y'all to Monday Morning MotoGP. Here we do it live on TikTok, and then it is aired, posted, whatever you want to call it, over on YouTube, so go check it out there. Make sure that you're following, sharing, mashing all the buttons, subscribe, everything you need to do to make this motorsport thing really happen for us. We're trying to spread the good word of MotoGP, especially in North America. So give us a hand. Help us out. We've got a lot to talk about today. We didn't have any MotoGP this last weekend, but I want to talk a little bit about some things in general. We're going to be talking about racer rivalries. We're going to be talking about the V4 versus the inline 4, and we're going to be talking about MotoGP independent teams and why they exist in the first place. So first up, let's talk about MotoGP rivalries. I think the most recent one we all remember, and the people that just can't seem to let go of, is Rossi versus Marquez. The bitter rivalry. These two hated each other in so many ways. And also, if you remember, kind of in the same area, we kind of had Danny Pedrosa and Marco Simoncelli. Like, they really didn't like each other, and Danny had said some things that he had to later regret. And so there has been a history in motorsport and sports in general of rivals on teams and racers in general just hating each other. And we're seeing a shift away from that. We're seeing the media try to hold on to this. We're seeing the fans still can't let go of Rossi versus Marquez, even though Rossi hasn't been on a MotoGP machine now in a few years. The fans and the media don't want to let this go, but the riders themselves, they just kind of want to ride. They don't really care about these rivalries. They don't really want to manufacture a rivalry that isn't there. This new breed of athlete, I think we're seeing it across all sports, where these kids grow up together in these camps, in these junior leagues. They race each other from the time that they're children. They grow bonds. They get to know each other. And yeah, do things happen on the track that maybe ruffle feathers left and right? Of course they do. But when it comes to the end of the day, these guys don't really take it personally. They'd rather go have a beer together, talk about it, respect each other, and then beat each other on the track. That doesn't seem to be enough for y'all. You want them to hate each other. We want Pecco Bagnaia and Marc Marquez, we wanted sparks to fly, right? We wanted them calling each other names from the opposite side of the pit box. So why aren't we seeing that this year? Why aren't we seeing Marc Marquez being just mind games and vicious like he used to back in the day? Even a few short years ago, in 2019, when he was really competitive and blowing everybody away, I mean, he was playing mind games with Davi, talking about different things that he should be doing, and, oh, I'm not really worried about this. I don't really consider him a competitor, all these sort of things. We're not seeing that out of Marc Marquez. So is it a maturing of the rider, or is it just a changing of the guard in the way things kind of operate with this new style of athlete? I think it's kind of both, but one thing I want to really point out, it is difficult to have bitter rivalries with someone who isn't a threat to you. Last year, Marc Marquez didn't have a rival on the grid. Why was that? He wasn't expecting to win the world title on that Gresini machine. The best he was hoping for was win a few races, compete, learn to love motorcycle racing again. And so we saw that kind of softer, more funny, more fun Marc Marquez that we had never seen in MotoGP, ever. This was a completely different guy because his mindset wasn't just killer instinct mindset, like, I have to win or die. It wasn't that. He was just trying to enjoy it again, having fun on the bike, and hey, stealing a win, stealing a podium, everything was gravy. So no one's going to ruffle his feathers. Even the crash with Pecco, where they both ended up in the gravel and they both had a couple words to say to each other, it's kind of like under the bridge, who cares at this point? And now we look at this year, and he looks across that garage at Pecco, and he's seeing a guy 100 points back in the championship. He's not seeing a bitter rival that he has to play mind games with. He can just ride his own ride and win the championship. So why are we picking fights? When you're thinking about it from Marc Marquez's perspective, why am I going to pick fights and play mind games and do dirty, underhanded things and, all the stuff that we're used to kind of seeing with Marc as far as, I'm not saying he's dirty, I'm just saying he plays those games. He doesn't have to now because they're not necessary. If he just rides his ride, races his race, he's going to win the championship. We're going to see it this year. He's got to stay on the bike, stay uninjured. He's going to win. Simple as that. So that's really one of the things that we're seeing in terms of not these bitter rivalries is who's going to be bitter rivals? Who's going to hate each other? Who are out there to hate each other? Like Quartararo doesn't seem like his personality, but also he's not competitive enough with the other guys to hate someone or be playing with mind games. Same thing with Pecco, same thing with Alex. They race each other hard, but there's no real need for these mind games because like who are they looking at? Who are they looking across the track going, oh, that guy beats me every week and I hate him so much? The answer is Marc Marquez, and there's just nothing you can do about it. There's no amount of getting under his skin. You're just going to motivate him more. Now, that's the first part. I don't think we have the true rivals like we've had in the past right now in MotoGP because we don't have like two riders at the top of their game, going at each other in the same way. Like you think about, Jorge Lorenzo and Rossi, like didn't really like each other because they were teammates on the same bike and a very similar skill level, meaning they could just race each other bar to bar for an entire freaking race. And they could ruin each other's races at times. That was a rivalry. They were so close together. So even looking at the teams this year, you look at Pecco and Marc. There's no question of who is the top rider on that team. It's Marc. You look at Yamaha, Fabio and Rins. Fabio is light years ahead of Alex Rins. Honda, they're just trying to survive at this point. KTM, there's a little bit of rivalry between Brad Binder and Pedro Acosta to be the top guy at KTM, but in the grand scheme of things, they're finishing 5th. That's not an exciting rivalry. Oh man, they're going to duke it out. They're going to knock each other off the bike. They're going to put their fists up in the garage because you finished 5th and I finished 6th. That's not happening. So I think if we're able to see some of these riders come through, get more competitive, we get more bikes, more brands, more manufacturers, more teams at the top, you're going to see some of these rivalries start to materialize. I mean, we've seen some of the interactions between people like Franco Morbidelli and Aleix Espargaro where he literally whooped Frankie upside the head. So there's definitely like adrenaline that happens in this sport. I just believe that it should come from the track. It should come from what happens on the track, and it should come from the ambition of the riders, not the media stirrup, not the fans just thirsty for blood. Because I'm just going to ask you, is it really that much better when the two riders hate each other? Is it so much better when you have someone to hate on Sunday? Like, does it make cheering for Marc better when you hate Pecco? Are you mad that you can't really hate Pecco? I don't know what to tell you if that's the answer. Like, it feels like maybe that's a you problem, and you should take yourself out, do some yoga, some Zen meditation going, like, get a little Zen garden on your desk and, find yourself, and then come back to the sport and just cheer for your guy. Positive vibes, y'all. All right, the second thing I want to talk about is the next generation of MotoGP riders, and this kind of ties into the first conversation of, are we ever going to see a Rossi Marquez rivalry, and who do we see it from? Because we have a lot of young riders in the paddock now, and at some point, some of the older riders are going to be shown the door. I mean, I can name, in the next 3 or 4 years, I don't think we're going to have Miguel Oliveira, Jack Miller, Alex Rins, Marini, possibly Joan Mir. I mean, a lot of these guys are going to move on from MotoGP, and a new crop of riders kind of led by our Fermanel de Guerres, Pedro Acostas, Ayaguras, Fabio Di Giannantonios, these young guys. That is going to be the core of MotoGP. And why is that the core of MotoGP? Because of satellite teams. Now, I think we forget, because Jorge Martin won the championship with Pramac Ducati, we forget that satellite teams, independent teams in MotoGP, are not here to win championships. They're not here to finish 5th or 4th or 6th in the title. Like, that's not what they look at the beginning of the year. Where exactly can we finish? Oh, we got to finish 3rd, or it's a bust year for a satellite team. That's why so many people looked at Pramac Yamaha, leaving Ducati, going to Yamaha, going, what are they doing? They just won the title. Well, their title rider was leaving. A new rider would have to come in. And the next year, they'd be competing with Marc and Pecco and Martin on another machine. And it's not Pramac's job to win the world title. It's not their job to finish 2nd. Their job is development. Say it with me one time. Independent teams, their job is development. It's to support the factory and support the rider ecosystem. Right? We talk about development, we talk about 2 things. A lot more we talk about the bike. We talk about what's happening on the bike. So if you look at Honda and Yamaha, in terms of development, that's what those satellite independent teams are doing. That's what LCR is doing. That's what Pramac is doing. It's development. And how do we know which kind of development they're focused on? Because they hired experienced riders. They are not focused on rider development. They are focused on bike development. It couldn't be more obvious, right? Now, with Yamaha bringing in Top Rock to the team, that goes back into the rider development side. So then you look across the aisle and you look at places like Aprilia and KTM and Ducati, where they have brought in riders to develop. So they're not just developing the bike, they're developing the riders. And on the Ducati side, obviously the most obvious person there is Firmin Aldeguer, but also people like DeGen Antonio, who they said, hey, have the latest spec bike. Let's see where you stack up, because if Mark is injured, God forbid, retires, Pecco moves on, we need to know who's next up in the ecosystem. You need young riders to come through these lower teams. They're not all just going to jump onto a factory ride their rookie year. In fact, very few of them do. We've seen it with Aprilia, bringing Raul Fernandez, keeping him. They're developing him as a rider, seeing if he can be the next Jorge Martin. We have Ayagura, the rookie, at Aprilia. They're not just trying to develop the bike there, they're trying to develop an ecosystem of riders that they can rely on to compete, to have their factory team compete down the road. If Ayagura was winning races, we wouldn't be talking about Jorge Martin right now not doing a contract with them. We'd be looking at moving up to the factory team, then waving goodbye to Jorge and saying, hey, we're done. Because that's what you're hoping for. You're hoping that the young guy coming up is the rider of the future for you. It is where I start to question what KTM is doing. Because obviously KTM brought in Pedro Acosta. They brought him through Gas right to the factory team. They're developing the bike. Obviously they're interested in developing riders. They've got a whole ecosystem. KTM is well entrenched in the junior categories. And then they signed two kind of old veterans in Maverick Vinales and Enea Bastianini, which means they are really focused on the bike more. Tech 3's KTM's job isn't to win an independent necessarily title. Their job is to help make that KTM as good as it can be moving forward, so that the big boys at the factory KTM have a bike that can compete at the front. That's the job. That's the job Maverick and Enea have come in to do there. So we see a lot of people talk about, well, VR46 would never get rid of Franco Morbidelli. I mean, he's like 5th in the championship right now. 5th in the championship doesn't mean all that much to the team. It's good. Of course they want to be the top independent team. Of course. But long run, if there's a young rider that Ducati wants to bring in and they need to free up a seat, they would gladly sacrifice a rider who is finishing top 5 in the championship for a rider who they think can be the next factory phenom. There's no question. Franco Morbidelli cannot hang on to his seat at Ducati if there's someone like Manu Gonzalez or Diogo Moreira who they think is going to be the next Marc Marquez. It's all speculation anyway. So sometimes we see some of these older riders top out. They're as good as they're going to be. They're never going to be a perennial winner. They're never going to be a weekly threat every single week. Maybe they'll win a race. Maybe they'll get a podium. That's good. We've seen where their potential maxes out. That's what the satellite teams do. We promote riders from the independent teams into the factory teams, and when they get a sense of a rider has hit the limit of their potential and as high as they can go, and that isn't winning a championship, no matter how talented that rider is, sooner or later they say goodbye. They go somewhere else. And a new younger rider starts from the bottom of the ladder and progresses to the top in the same way to maximize their potential. So I'm going to say it one more time so everyone in the back gets it, because I know I'm going to get comments about this, about, oh, winning is the only thing that matters. It's not. You would never organize a grid in a paddock if winning was the only thing we cared about. It's just not how you would do it. You wouldn't give one team lesser machinery to compete, or make one team be the constant experimental guinea pig and trying all the new parts, and some of them are terrible and some of them make weekends horrible. You wouldn't do that to a team who's trying to win. You do that to a team who's trying to develop. That's what it's all about. So I'm going to say it one more time. Satellite teams aren't here to win. Satellite teams aren't here to finish in the standings. Satellite teams are to help develop bike and rider. So speaking of development, I want to talk about one final thing before I go, and that is Yamaha's V4 project. I know the fans like to make statements. You hear something out there in motorcycle land, you hear a talking point being preached. I remember the one a few years ago was, Fabio Quartararo should just go to Aprilia, win the world title. And every fan on earth started repeating that as gospel. Oh, it's time for Fabio Quartararo to go to Aprilia and win a world title, as if that was a magic bullet. And I said it back then, him going to Aprilia is not a magic bullet to win a title. There is no magic bullet to win a title. There's no shortcut. MotoGP is hard. It is slow, painstaking process. It is a game of millimeters and microseconds. There is no magic bullet. Here we are again. We have fans screaming at Yamaha, can't understand why they haven't just gone to the V4 like everyone else on the grid. Yamaha should just go to a V4 so they can win a title again. Yamaha's not going to be able to compete until they get that V4. V4, 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 inline 4, blah, blah, blah. The V4 is not a magic bullet for Yamaha to suddenly win races in MotoGP. Do you know how I know this? Do you know how I know this to a certainty? This isn't an opinion. I will say it. Yamaha getting a V4 does not mean they will run at the front with Ducati. And I know this because Honda has a V4 and they don't run at the front with Ducati. KTM has a V4 and they don't run at the front with Ducati every week. Every other bike on the grid is a V4. So Yamaha was seeing if a different approach could be as competitive. Could a different approach give them an advantage? And in a game of millimeters and microseconds, you have to bear that out. You have to give it time to develop. And here we are seeing the stupid, useless inline 4 take pole position at racetracks. So of course they have to sit back and pause because they can't just slap a new engine in the Yamaha and expect to be right at the front. That's not how it works. It takes development. It takes time. That V4 has to produce in a better way than the inline 4 or it's a step backwards. And Yamaha can't afford a step backwards. There is no magic bullet in MotoGP, and for real, the V4 engine is not a magic bullet. Now, will it be the ultimate engine that Yamaha goes with? Probably. They will probably go with that to be back on the same footing as the rest of the manufacturers so that they are kind of on an even playing field. I think there's some aerodynamic. The necessity, the V4 is kind of more compact. It's not as wide and tall. You don't have to push as much air if you have a V4 versus the inline 4. So there are advantages. I'm not saying there are not advantages. I'm saying that's not a magic bullet. And so they have to test this V4. They have to know that this engine going forward, not just this year, but into the future, is the right step. How stupid would they look if they were on the brink of brilliance with the inline 4 and then just gave it up to do the thing everyone else is doing? Ducati is in the position they are in because they did things a little different than everyone else was doing. And it took a lot of time for it to actually bear fruit. They were terrible for a very long time in MotoGP. Casey Stoner, for the longest time, was the only human that could even ride a Ducati. Vizioso did a great, commendable job, couldn't win a title. It took a long time for the Ducati to get here. And so it's not just a matter of slapping a new engine and calling it good. If you're really paying attention, you know Yamaha's biggest problem isn't really even horsepower output. It's not that they have a low horsepower engine. They lack rear grip. They lack some front end. They have some front end chatter. That's really the issue. And now having Pirelli come into the paddock, no one knows how that's going to affect. Wouldn't it be crazy if for some reason the Pirelli tire doesn't mix with the way the V4 puts out power and suddenly Yamaha on their inline 4 is the fastest in the grid? Is that going to happen? Who freaking knows? None of us know. We're not in those meetings. We're not engineers. We're not there with them. We don't know. All I do know is that whatever they're doing behind the scenes, there's no fast fix. There's no magic bullet. There's nothing that's going to make them instantly faster tomorrow and win. And the V4 is not. It's just not magic. So all the clickbait headlines you see about, oh my gosh, the V4 destroys all this and that. Shut up. Stop. Hopefully, it's a step forward. How much of a step? Say it with me. Millimeters and microseconds. All right, that does us for this episode of the Monday Morning MotoGP. Thank you all so much for listening, watching. Catch this over on YouTube when I post it a little bit later, and make sure you're like, follow, sharing, mashing all the buttons all the time. And we'll see you again soon.